Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel.
Hey, welcome, beautiful people. Thank you for joining Coffee with Foul Play, Trial Tunnel Vision, and we're on episode number 5. My name is Dr. Silkman, and with Coffee with Foul Play, what we do, especially for our new listeners, we go through MAM 1 and we put up a series of slides, and as a panel, we discuss it. And so far, the Foul Play channel, we have 21 videos on Coffee with Foul Play, and also uploaded on our Foul Play YouTube server. We have 1,174 phone calls. These are the phone calls from Stephen Avery to his family from jail. And as we know, Christy has done a sterling job analyzing those phone calls, and those phone calls are available for you to listen. We also have 15 Thirsty for Theory Thursdays. I'm glad I got that one right. We've
Good
got
job.
15 of we've got 50. It's a real tongue twister. We have 15 of those where we discuss certain theories and certain hypotheses, and we also have guests as well. And I've also done also on the Foul Play server and YouTube channel, we have 11 presentations that I have done, mainly looking at the forensics. So if you want to get into the basic forensics of the cases, please have a listen to those at your leisure. Well, guys, I want to say that as a panel, we are all very thankful for our subscribers. We have currently 807 subscribers, and we would, all of us from Foul Play would like to thank you very much for your support, for your comments, and for your suggestions. That's fantastic. We've only been really together as a group for about 5 months, and as you can see, we've done a lot of work, a lot of good work, and we thank you guys for your subscriptions. We thank you guys for your comments. And collectively, our videos have garnished over 187,000 views. And that's awesome. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And if you like what we do, please subscribe, hit the like button, and please provide us with the feedback. We try and answer as many questions as possible. Okay, well, our regular researchers joining me, our regular researchers for today are BB, Big Jeff, Kelly, Christy, Millbilly, and Obi-Wan. And monitoring the chat will be both Sammy and Zoe. So if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. And our guest researcher for today is Kate, and we welcome Kate. All right, guys, but there is something I want to discuss, something I want to go over, and this is again talking about the feedback that we get from our listeners. And I want to give a big shout out to Crockett Thompson. And Crockett let me know that I had made an error in one of our I think it was last week's podcast, and I may have stated it again, and I want to clear it up. So in the podcast, I stated that the state had dropped the mutilation of a corpse charge against Stephen Avery, and that is indeed not the case. In actual fact, it was the jury that found Stephen Avery not guilty of that particular charge, which is, of course, bizarre in itself. So, guys, I think now, and thank you, Crocker, I think now we're in a good position to summarize those charges, because we're really getting to a final stage now of our podcast for MAM 1. So I just want to go over this, and thank you, Crockett, for letting me know. Okay, On the 15th of November 2005, the following criminal complaint against Stephen Avery was lodged, and it was for 2 charges: first-degree intentional homicide and mutilating a corpse. Now, as we know, and as we've discussed in our podcast, we have Brendan Dassey's so-called coerced confession. Well, as a result of that coerced confession, on March the 8th, 2006, there was an amended criminal complaint laid against Stephen Avery. And it was for the following charges. Firstly, first-degree intentional homicide as party to a crime, mutilating a corpse as a party to a crime, possession of a firearm by a felon. Now, these were the additional charges that were also added. First-degree sexual assault as a party to a crime, kidnapping, false imprisonment. Now, it's important to realize here, guys, that the last 3 charges, first-degree sexual assault as a party to a crime, kidnapping, and false imprisonment, were dropped. Okay, they were dropped. Also, in Stephen Avery's trial, he was found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as a party to a crime and guilty for possession of a firearm by a felon. And as Crockett pointed out, he was found not guilty by jury of mutilating a corpse as a party to a crime, which is incredibly bizarre. Now, at the same time, in Brendan Dassey, he was charged and found guilty of the following 3 charges. 1, first-degree intentional homicide as a party to a crime. He was found guilty. He was found guilty of mutilating a corpse as a party to a crime. Now, that charge, the jury found Stephen Avery not guilty. Yet Brendan Dassey was found guilty of that charge, and Brendan Dassey was found guilty for second-degree sexual assault as a party to a crime, whereas the first-degree sexual assault as a party to a crime against Stephen Avery was dropped. And again, guys, thank you very much, Crockett, for letting me know. I feel that if we do make a mistake, it's our duty to correct it. Now, panel, do we have any comments about those charges? Big Jeff.
It's a small thing, but I find it ironic that Brendan's was able to be convicted on the sexual assault component because he confessed to it. Very interestingly, just about the only one of those charges that he didn't confess to is mutilation of a corpse, which is, of course, a very important piece of forensic evidence. And all through his confession, I don't recall him ever saying that they chopped her up. And as a matter of fact, the pictures he for Michael Kelly showed a whole body in the fire.
Correct.
So they can, if he confessed to everything, why didn't he mention that?
Correct. Thank you, Big Jeff. Yeah, I mean, when you look at those charges, especially what Brendan Dassey was found guilty for, it is completely bizarre because, of course, what we have here is a situation where we have both Brendan and Stephen allegedly committing these crimes at the same place, at the same time, on the same alleged victim. And yet the outcomes were completely different, bar, of course, the homicide charge. Christy, do you have a comment?
Yes, I wasn't sure if you were watching the chat or not, and I wanted to let you know that Crockett said, "You're welcome, doctor."
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And again, guys, we're not perfect. We do make mistakes, but if the mistakes are picked up, guys, it really is important to correct them, right? Just for the sake of history and to make sure that what we are saying is indeed correct. Thank you so much, Crockett. I appreciate that. Now, we left on slide 189, and that's basically the sentences that were read out for Stephen Avery on June the 1st, 2007, and for Brendan Dassey on August the 2nd, 2007. We also discuss the comment made by Judge Patrick Willis, where he said to Stephen Avery, and I quote, "You are probably the most dangerous individual ever to set foot into this courtroom." Now, my own personal belief, I reckon there's an attorney or two that were probably more dangerous than Stephen was. Panel, does anyone want to make a quick comment on that? Christy. Christy.
I just want to know how he could say that, considering the first 18 years that man spent in prison was for something he didn't do. What exactly? What made him say that? Where did he? Didn't he also say something about the escalation of Stephen's crimes?
Correct. I have an
What
awful,
escalation?
I have an awful feeling that I think the judge forgot that Stephen Avery was actually innocent of the attack and sexual assault of Penny Bernstein, because Judge Willis talked about the ramping up of the crimes. Well, he ramped up from running his cousin off the road, took out a firearm, which is, of course, wrong, but he went from there straight to murder number one. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Crockett is asking who's the party he carried out those crimes with, not Stephen.
Well, that's right, because remember, we have Ken Kratz, who said that the murder took place by one individual only, Stephen Avery. Big Jeff, thank you. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
It's going to be hard to keep it to just one, but it's quite interesting that there are two attorneys who happen to be in a court, and I realize Judge Willis was not in Brendan's case.
Correct.
But if we look at both of the prosecuting, or both attorneys, Kratz and Len Kaczynski, both of them ought to be registered sex offenders for the crimes that they've committed. Kratz, sexting domestic abuse victims,
Yes.
and Len Kaczynski recently getting a very, very degree-oriented sentence for parole violation for harassing. I think it was an intern.
Yes.
The first harassment was he just kept on going meow meow.
That's
People
correct.
call him Len Meow Kaczynski.
That's correct.
And he violated the restraining order again, and he should have been put away
Yes.
for 6 months, but he got some light duty because he was a former judge.
Yes.
So dangerous
yeah.
people. Yeah.
You got
Yes.
5 or 6 days. That's what his sentence was.
They got
Right.
nothing, basically.
And he's probably going to get off on house arrest. Who knows?
Yes. Yeah. Well, we know the system, Millbilly, and you're correct. I think it's pretty obvious that the law looks after itself. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you,
what I was
Milton.
just getting ready to say. It shows exactly how they look after one another. Even after they commit crimes, they're still protected.
Correct. And that, of course, when you have immunity to prosecution, when you have all these things go in your favor, unfortunately, this is how it is. The law looks after itself. And we know, of course, the scandal involving Ken Kratz, the sexting scandal, how he tried to keep it quiet for more than a year until it got released. And, we'll be talking about that. And Christy will back me up. He wrote an entire chapter on that incident alone. And the way he presented it was, look, I did wrong. Hey, let's move on, guys. Nothing to see here. Yet he was savage on Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. So, it's the pot calling the kettle black. and it's really a really shameful incident that took place. Panel, any other comments? Okay, so guys, we can actually move on, and we can have a look at slide 190. But before I do, I have to read this quote from Ken Kratz's book. Now, this is important because remember, guys, there were two separate trials, one involving Stephen Avery and one involving Brendan Dassey. Now, neither Stephen or Brendan appeared at the complementary trial. Now, this is important. So I'll read this out. I quote, this is from Ken Kratz's book. So, unless we cut a deal with Dassey's attorney, which we hadn't, we couldn't legally call Brendan to the stand. Let me say that again. I never used Brendan Dassey's statements, any of them, to convict Stephen Avery. Avery was convicted primarily on the forensic evidence recovered at the scene. The blood, the key, the bones, and the bullet. Stephen sunk himself. Panel, do we have any comments on that? Christy?
He says that more than once in that book, actually,
Correct.
about Stephen Avery sunk himself.
Correct.
He's full of shit. I'm sorry. He's full of shit.
Thank you for coming straight to the point. See, here's the bizarre situation here. There was a lot of legal Thank you, Christy. There was a lot of legal maneuvering and shenanigans going on. I mean, here we have the one victim, we have two perpetrators, and yet they were kept separate. And I believe it was a very clever move by the prosecution to keep them separate, the trials separate. And it's amazing how Ken Kratz, it's obvious what had happened. Ken Kratz, Kaczynski, and Michael O'Kelly were obviously working together, right? The strategy was pretty obvious, and you can see it in the book. You can actually see it in Man 1 as well. It's pretty clear that Brendan, and we'll discuss this, Brendan's own attorney and Michael O'Kelly were not working for Brendan, but were actually working for the state. So they were gathering all this evidence to make Brendan look worse and to provide more ammunition against Stephen Avery. So what they did, what the attorneys did, both state and defense, they were basically trying to go for a plea deal. So in other words, Stephen Avery is this evil monster. He made his nephew do all these horrible things to Teresa Halbach. So what the prosecution team, what the state and the defense team were going to do was get Brendan to admit that he had done these things, which made it look even worse for his uncle, of course. But they would go enter into a plea deal, and that Brendan will be out in 15 years. So, of course, it backfired when Len Kaczynski was fired, and obviously Michael O'Kelly was no longer involved as well, and Brendan got a new defense team. So they went in with this strategy. Panel, what do you think about that? That defense and state were actually working hand in hand. Have you ever heard of that happening before? Panel, I'll open it up to you guys. Big Jeff.
It is unbelievable that is just not conduct that would get somebody disbarred, especially Mike O'Kelly. What he did,
Yes,
was just unbelievable, and who he even admitted in court. He said he was who he was working for. It's just
Yes.
that can't be done. He accepted $15,000
Yes.
for that.
But
Right,
thank you, Big Jeff. But Big Jeff, but don't you find it rather amazing how they just openly admitted what they were doing? because there was an investigation, of course. They just openly admitted that they were gathering information against Brendan, against Stephen, and going for a plea deal. Christy, do you have a comment?
Oh, Kelly's performance at trial,
Yes.
that was deplorable. That was disgusting. That should have never been allowed.
Yeah.
The jury should have never been allowed to see that. That was such an act. That was that
You mean
part.
when he was crying with the blue
Yes,
ribbon?
yes, yes. That was utter complete bullshit. There's just no other word for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, it, I had to double watch those episodes because I didn't really believe what I was hearing, where you have a team representing a client and they're actually working against the client because they went in with a strategy that Brendan Dassey was guilty. So as a consequence of that, instead of working for Brendan, they were working against him. Christy, do you have a comment?
And poor Brendan, he didn't have the intelligence level required to know the game that they were playing with him in
Yeah.
the lion's den that they walked him right into.
Correct. And I think, Christy, you'll back me up on this, but when Man were filming this, the look of utter shock and horror on Brendan's face, as if to think, oh my God, this is what these guys were doing. And of course, they showed the family as well, his mother, his grandmother. It was just so bad, especially when they're reading out the email about the fact that we can cut the branch of this family, that they're all criminals, that they're all having sex with each other. That's pretty bad when it comes from your own son's attorneys, right? Christy,
Yes,
what do you think? That
it
must
was
be
this.
pretty bad.
It was disgusting. It should have never been allowed. And yes, you can't believe this is really happening. I can't believe
No.
that people who stand behind their titles and their reputations and are supposed to uphold our justice system are behaving like this. These are the people
Yes.
that we put a lot of faith and a lot of trust into these people, and I'm sorry, they don't deserve it right now. They
Yeah.
deserve to be questioned, every single one of them. They really need to speak for how they acted, even if Brendan and Stephen were innocent. The way
Yes.
these people acted is
Yeah.
unacceptable. It's unacceptable, guilty or innocent.
Yes. Thank you, Christy. It's pretty clear that Len Kaczynski and Michael O'Kelly were working collaboratively with Ken Kratz, Fallon, and Garm. And often you can see in the corridor, they were actually talking with each other. And Lord knows what they were discussing behind closed doors. But clearly they went in with the strategy. That strategy failed. Unfortunately, one of the biggest victims in all of this is poor Brendan. I believe that Brendan was used as a pawn to get Stephen Avery, and Brendan unfortunately became collateral damage. And it's really disgusting when one looks at the way the whole trial panned out. So, guys, if we have a look, Bibi, do you have a comment?
Yeah, it definitely was get Steve Avery at all costs.
Correct. Thank you, Bibi.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, it's not us making that up. You can actually see it in the trial transcripts, and also reading Ken Kratz's book. You can see what his motivations were, and also Ken Kratz's behavior during the trial as well. In both trials, he made it personal. He changed his demeanor whenever he was talking about Teresa Halbach in front of her parents. He completely changed. He acted like a grieving father, and he took it very personal. And Christy will back me up. He had an absolute obsession with Stephen Avery. Christy.
Just about everybody on this podcast can now back you up, as they sat and listened to me read the whole book to them the other night. everybody on this podcast right now heard the jealousy and the hatred dripping
Yeah.
from those pages, dripping from his every word, every syllable that man, you could feel his hate for Stephen Avery, his jealousy, his
Yeah.
disdain. I mean,
Yes.
I'm going to run out of words. You can
Yes.
feel it. There's no mistaking it. No mistaking
Yes.
it at all.
Yes. And it's actually, thank you, Christy. Yes, Christy did read out Ken Kratz's book to us. I don't know if the panel has recovered yet.
Story
Big Jeff.
time with
Oh,
Christy.
sorry, Bibi.
Story time with Christy. It's a new thing we're having over on Foul Play.
Yes. Yes.
I like the new book better.
Yes, and it was awesome. But it was awesome. And it's important that listeners really comprehend and understand the venom that Ken Kratz still has for Stephen Avery and his family. Big Jeff, did you want to make a comment?
Just very briefly, the viewers know that we have our Thursday podcasts, and that
Yes.
probably coming up, you and Christy are going to prepare a summary for us, where we're going to go to that most excellent Pulitzer Prize winning Ken Kratz book, right? He did win a Pulitzer for that, right?
Yeah, well,
I don't know about the Pulitzer part, but we will
that's
definitely be doing a podcast.
A bullshitzer is what it is. Yes.
There you go. There you go.
Yes.
And
yes,
we will also be going. We'll also be going on Linda K listening to do that as well, so you can find it in either spot.
Yes. Yeah. Well, both Christy and I, we have read Ken Kratz's book, and we've written down some notes, and we're going to have really an informal chat, talking about our thoughts about the book, and hopefully everyone will listen to it. It certainly was a very eye-opening experience, that is for sure. But guys, sorry, Sammy, did you have a comment that you wanted to make?
No, everything's good.
Everything's
Thank you.
good? Beautiful. For me personally, slide 190 is really important for me. As a former scientist myself who worked with DNA for well over 30 years, this is what intrigued me about this particular trial, the two cases. And that really is the power of DNA in a murder trial. Because the way the two trials were done separately, Brendan never appeared in Stephen's trial, Stephen never appeared in Brendan's trial. They were treated separately. And what intrigued me about this particular case is that really this case is all about DNA forensic evidence. Now, we can see that we have Stephen Avery. He was sentenced to life in prison. His alleged victim was Teresa Halbach. Now, with Stephen, we have to be honest here. There was plenty of DNA forensic evidence against Stephen. There was blood, 6 drops, not pools of blood, but 6 drops of blood that were found in the Toyota RAV4. Stephen Avery's DNA, and only Stephen Avery's DNA, was found on the Toyota RAV4 key, the so-called spare or valet Toyota RAV4 key that was found in his bedroom. Also, touch DNA belonging to Stephen Avery was found on the hood latch. Now remember, guys, that DNA on the hood latch was only ever found as a result of Brendan Dassey. But as we've discussed in the podcast, it was Fassbender who told Brendan Dassey what was Stephen doing under the hood, right? Because they're trying to tie in with the fact that the battery cables were taken off, okay, in the RAV4. So, but on the flip side, we have absolutely no fingerprints belonging to Stephen Avery in or outside the Toyota RAV4. But as we've discussed in our podcast many times, all of that evidence is extremely controversial. And all you need to do is to go back, have a look at some of my presentations that I've done, that excellent Thirsty for Theory Thursday podcasts that have been done, and you can, and also the Coffee for Foul Play podcast. You can see that we have discussed that forensic evidence very, very closely. Is it controversial? Sure is, right? We've talked about a planting scenario, how could it have been easily planted, and whether forensic evidence was planted by unknown third parties. It is indeed possible. But everyone would have to admit the case against Stephen, on the face of it, does not look good because there is forensic evidence there. But it can be, of course, discussed, disputed. What really broke my heart, and I think a lot of our listeners and members of our panel will also agree, is what happened with Brendan Dassey. At the time, he was a child, 16 years old. He also was sentenced to life in prison for allegedly murdering or partaking in murder of the same victim that Stephen Avery was charged with, Teresa Halbach. But of course, as we know, there is no DNA evidence linking Brendan Dassey to Teresa Halbach or to the trailer, the garage, and even the Toyota RAV4. There is no DNA evidence at all. There's also no physical evidence at all linking Brendan to the crime. There's no corroborating evidence either. So Brendan had made all these statements. We used the knife. We put it in the RAV4. Well, they checked the RAV4 multiple times. They took the RAV4 to pieces. A Millbilly, did they actually find the knife in the RAV4?
They found nothing that he said.
They found nothing. And in actual fact, and Millbilly's done a lot of really good analysis with the photographs that have been released. They took the RAV4 apart. They removed the seats. They scanned, the FBI scanned the RAV4 with a laser, I think looking for fingerprints. None were found. Otherwise, it would have been shouted from the rooftops. So we've got this incredible murder scene, the Toyota RAV4, in which we have the victim's blood. Now, I'm saying in this case, the victim is Teresa Halbach, saliva from the cherry Pepsi can, and all that forensic evidence was completely separate from the drops of blood. So in other words, there was never a mixture of both the victim's and the suspect's blood or saliva taking place. They were completely separate, which is rather bizarre. And as we've discussed before, and I think as Myed has obtained a FOIA for A23, which really unfortunately didn't disclose any new information, we now know that there's a third genomic profile on the Toyota RAV4 that was present as blood and a fingerprint on the back door of the Toyota RAV4, where you have to open up the latch if you're going to place a victim in the back of the car, back of the RAV4. This is remarkable. So we have a third genomic profile, and you guessed it, we have no idea who deposited A23. So someone was bleeding and left their blood on the hood latch. Now, one would think, oh, wow, that's a very important piece of forensic evidence. What did the state do with it? Big Jeff, you want to tell us what the state did with A23?
They buried it. If you listen to the podcast that we did, you actually had to do some fanciful sleuthing work to try to track the progress of A23 through the testing process. And I bet it was who knows how many times they had to test it before they got it to come back with nothing, right?
Correct.
I mean, it was visible as a visible sample. You could see the blood. In your experience, how often is it that you can actually see the blood sample and it comes back to nothing? That you can't do anything conclusive
yeah.
from it.
Yeah, if you can see blood, then there's going to be likely hundreds of millions of white blood cells. Because remember, you can only extract DNA from cells that have got a nucleus. White blood cells. Red blood cells don't have a nucleus. You can't extract DNA from red blood cells. But if you can see red blood cells, and believe me, one of the forensic scientists pointed out to Cherie Culhane, you better take a swab of that, right? That was the blood that was on the door handle, and there obviously was enough DNA, but unfortunately, Cherie Culhane was only able to obtain a partial profile. Now, one would think that you would go back and re-extract A23 because you can't explain why you would have blood and a fingerprint on the very door handle of the victim's Toyota RAV4 at a spot where you have to open up the back door in order to place the victim inside. That, along with CX, which was blood found at the quarry, which represents another unknown genomic profile, I believe, guys, that there are your two biggest clues that are likely to point to a perpetrator. Now, guys, the important thing is this: neither Brendan nor Stephen deposited CX or A23. Do we know who A23 and CX belongs to? No, we don't. And I'm really speechless, guys, because this case is all about DNA, yet they have A23 and Cherie Culhane never went back to re-extract it, get a full genomic profile, and hey, run it through CODIS, right? See if it's a hit with anybody else. But guys, that's why we're called Trial Tunnel Vision. You don't look at anybody else apart from Stephen and Brendan. Sammy, do you have a question?
Yep, there's a lot of chat in here about that very topic, about how all these things are unknown, and the only thing that matters is what connects to Stephen Avery.
Correct. I mean, I know this sounds bizarre, but if you've got the victim's car, the Toyota RAV4, you have blood and a fingerprint right on the strategic spot where you need to open up the door in order to place the body. Don't you think that's worth investigating and finding out a little bit more? Because that's likely to lead to a third party or to a party that actually was involved in the crime, right? Again, the state did nothing, and I have an awful, awful feeling that A23 is gone, disappeared, because I found in the documents in CASO that Cherie Culhane re-examined the swab for A23 and she couldn't see any red on it. So hopefully it's still kept and that DNA can be extracted from it. But I'm very, very concerned. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Yeah, so when you take the swab in the first place, would you do your best to remove the entire blood stain from the RAV itself, or you're just talking about the cotton swab or whatever type of swab that they usually get it off in the first place? And
Yeah.
notionally speaking, would that stain that's still on the RAV? Of course, we know the RAV is going to, but let's just say in theory, the RAV was still there. Would it be possible to swab the RAV itself and still get something from that even after all these years?
I highly doubt it, because what happens is you've got blood that would have dried up, the cells would have desiccated. It's likely they've been exposed to the environment, bacteria, fungi. They contain degradative enzymes, and it's likely that the DNA is completely broken down now. So I would say,
Thank
Big
you.
Jeff, you could try, but I don't like your chances. BB, do you have a comment?
Well, yeah, the blood would dry up on there and flake and turn into those flakes like in the front end of the car.
Yeah,
And if it wasn't like sealed the whole panel in some kind of a bag,
yeah,
they would
yes,
turn to dust
yes.
over time.
Unfortunately, it's likely lost forensic evidence. But normally, what you do is when you take a swab uh, of a sample, you cut the swab in half and you do a DNA extraction on half the swab, which means that technically the swab is kept in a sterile condition, which means that there should be plenty of DNA left on the swab to re-extract DNA from. However, I wouldn't allow Cherie Cohen anywhere near that swab. But you know, and I know that there will likely be what? Either a mysterious flood or a mysterious fire, and forensic evidence will disappear. You know, I know I'm speculating here, but it doesn't look too good. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Well, I have a comment here from Michael. DNA originally exonerated Stephen Avery and later, ironically, wrongfully convicted him later. Wisconsin wins and will never give up the to exonerate him again. Too much at stake.
Oh, look, thank you for that comment. There's no question. We've discussed on the panel many times in different forums. The state has got too much to lose, and the state, and we've seen it with the attitude towards Zellner, they're going to protect the verdicts at all costs. They're going to use any legal means that they possibly can, but if the state is secreting out forensic evidence and it's disappearing, there'll be nothing left to test, which would be a real tragedy. So continuing, thank you for that comment. If we continue with Brendan, the reason why it's so tragic is that he also had no proper legal representation. His own legal team were actually working for the state, which is completely shameful. And during Brendan Dassey's trial, he had enough courage to go on the stand and recant his so-called confession. Similarly, his cousin, Kayla, also recanted as well. Millbilly, do you have a comment?
Well, if you look at Stephen's November 9th interview and Brendan Dassey's interview, they used the same tactics against both of them.
Yes.
Stephen was just smart enough. Nah, they tried to downplay the situation with Stephen, like, oh, was this an accident?
Correct.
And then, yeah.
Correct. That, Millbilly, you have to agree, that's got to be one of the most shameful things I've ever heard on that November the 9th interview, in which Wiegert and Fassbender were saying, if you accidentally killed Teresa, we would understand it. You know, did she fall in the salvage yard?
Yeah, like he tries to give him scenarios, like were you showing her a car in a junkyard and maybe she tripped and fell.
She tripped and fell. And thank you, Millbilly. And you can imagine Stephen Avery saying, yeah, she actually did trip and fall, but I really can't explain why I didn't just simply call the ambulance. We decided to sexually assault her, cut off her hair, stab her, shoot her 10 times, cut her up and throw her onto a fire. And I'm laughing because it's so ridiculous what Fassbender and Wiegert were trying to do. Millbilly.
It's just like even when they start to mention things, first they mention they found bones. Stephen doesn't really react. Then they continue mentioning they found a body. Stephen still doesn't react.
Yes.
But then when they say they found a bloody handprint,
yes,
we found your DNA in her car.
Yes.
We found her DNA in your trailer.
Correct.
And I know they're lying to him, but some of the things they're saying are truthful. Like when they say the dogs took us to where everything was. That's a fact. The dogs were on a hot scent onto Cuss Road, and they were stopped from going there.
Correct. And also, Millbilly, thank you for that. Also, Millbilly, don't forget, Fassbender told Stephen Avery on November the 9th exactly where the RAV4 came from.
Yep.
Right?
Like if you listen to the
Exactly.
last 11 minutes of that interview,
Yes.
everything we're talking about's in there. The last 11 minutes.
Yes. Because Fassbender and Wiggett leave the room, then come back in, and all hell breaks loose. Right, Millbilly?
It's true.
They completely hone into him. So it's amazing that when Brendan was telling Fassbender and Wiggett where the RAV4 was, I'll quote from Ken Kratz's book. This is about the RAV4. Dassey admits to helping his uncle hide the SUV down by the pit. Now note, the evening of October the 31st, and says they drove the vehicle the back way around the salvage yard to deposit the car. So Brendan told them a completely different scenario to what Fassbender told Stephen. So Brendan told the investigators, oh yeah, Uncle Steve and I, we drove the RAV4 down to the pit. And he specifically said down past Chucky's house. So think about it, guys. He had to, both him and Stephen had to have driven the RAV4 past Barb's home.
I find it very key. They asked Brendan, well, does Chucky know about this?
Yes. And of course, Chucky never saw anything. He would have had to have driven the car past his grandmother's house, Chucky's house, and no one saw a thing, right? Which is in the complete opposite direction from what Fassbender told Stephen, right? So clearly, and if the two boys drove the vehicle down on October the 31st, then that means from October the 31st to November the 5th, no one, no visitor, no member of the family saw the blue Toyota RAV4 down at the pit. And Millbilly, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Earl down there with Stephen sighting in a rifle?
November 5th or 4th. Friday,
Yes.
November 4th.
Yes, they were in that general area, and no one noted a blue Toyota RAV4. We have the flyover. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
So, Wilbert Siebert made mention of the Toyota down by the pit around that time on the 4th.
Just
being followed by a white vehicle.
Right. Okay. As in driving into the salvage yard.
Correct.
Big Jeff.
Correct.
Big Jeff.
I just wanted to clarify, that he did not. Wilmer Siebert did not say he saw it in the salvage. He said he's like you just corrected Obi-Wan, that he saw it driving in, followed by a white vehicle. Yeah.
Off of Jambo Creek.
Right.
Via Conveyor Road.
Yes. And we also have the flyover on the 4th, which no one saw anything in the salvage yard. So you've got all this corroborating evidence to suggest that what Earl was saying was indeed correct, because he even said it during one of the police phone calls that was taped. That, well, I didn't see the vehicle down there. Bibi, do you have a comment?
I know why Earl didn't see the car. It was hid behind all those trees.
It was. Yes, and of course, he actually admitted, or there's a report in CASO in which he actually had ripped out trees, right? And with roots still attached, of course. And what did the investigators find near the RAV4? Trees.
And don't forget, she's a missing person. It's been all over the news. they're telling you we're looking for a dark green Toyota RAV4. So everybody's spotting it. There's tons of numerous calls, people calling in sightings of her. So if the
Correct.
car would have been
Yeah.
there on the 4th when they were down in the pit by the crusher, sighting in his gun, shooting
Yes.
in the same direction, they would have seen it.
Yes. Correct. And no one saw Toyota RAV4 down there. And just to quote King Kratz, and I really, Millbilly, before I do, yes, do you have a comment?
But where was it spotted?
Where was the Toyota RAV4 spotted?
Yes. Numerous
The
times.
147 turnaround.
Same spot, but it's ignored. Same
Correct.
spot they find the audio log cell phone and paperwork they speak of.
Correct. And Big Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but you did an actual presentation on the audio Vox phone.
That's right. Yeah, it's on the
Yeah.
Follow Play YouTube channel. And I'd
Yes.
like to have more of you.
Of course. Please come and check it out. But just quoting King Kratz again, I quote, Stephen had every intention of crushing the SUV, according to Brendan, but he waited too long. Pam Sturm, a citizen searcher, discovered the RAV4 on the morning of Saturday, November the 5th, before he had a chance to crush it. Millbilly, do you have a comment?
He would have had a chance to crush it Friday.
Yes.
Chucky's gone. Alan's gone. It's just Dolores.
Yes.
Earl does not live on the property. So after
Correct.
the yard closed, where's he going? He's going home.
Correct.
And we hear numerous times Stephen bitching about him always leaving early.
Yes.
So he
Yes.
could have crushed it. He knows
Yes.
how to work everything.
Correct. He
He
does.
crushed the last car that was sitting in the crusher.
Yes.
And
Yes, he
Stephen even tells Fasper and Wiegert, if I did this, I would have
Yes.
got rid of the car.
I would have crushed it. Correct. Yeah, it honestly, it makes no sense. And remember, if Stephen and Brendan drove the RAV4 down to the pit, that meant that Brendan Dassey, if he sat in the passenger seat, he would have sat on a CD case that had a blood smear on it. And there was also bottles of drink. So exactly where was Brendan Dassey going to sit? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever because they examined his pants. I'm not sure whether they had been washed or not. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
Not only that, if Brendan was in the passenger side, how would you get Avery's blood over on that side?
Correct. And I believe they examined Brendan's shorts and there was no presence of blood. And now I'm not sure whether that was due by the fact that they were washed or whatever, but they were forensically examined. No blood was found. No blood was detected. Because remember, there was some bleach stains on the pants, the jeans that he was wearing, but no presence of blood. Yeah, it makes no sense. If you're going to drive the RAV4, why drive it right past the crusher? Right? Because on the way to the pit is the crusher. You might as well take it straight to the crusher if you're going to do it. And why would you leave the victim's car with your blood in it from October the 31st to November the 5th? And why would Stephen and Brendan go to Crivets as though nothing has happened? Again, it makes no sense at all. Why leave one of the most important pieces of the puzzle directly out in the open amongst old cars and then do such a poor job to disguise it and leave the cover of the wheel that says Toyota RAV4? Big Jeff, do you have an answer to that? Why would you do that?
Because you're a complete friggin' idiot.
Yes. But remember, the same two idiots are forensic gurus that can clean up crime scenes. Millbilly.
I just been thinking, and on the night of the 4th or
Yes.
the 3rd, when they go to leave, and Steven says he sees lights. Prior to
Yes.
that, he mentions the Bobby Dassey and blaming them. Do they want to come to Menards with this? Bobby says he has something to do. The fact that
Yes.
Steven didn't attempt to call Bobby to go check out the lights makes me think that Bobby had already left.
Right.
So he wasn't there. So they had to come back and check themselves. You already know Barb wasn't home because she's always at Scott's.
Correct. Yeah. There's something of significance in regarding to the lights that they saw, both Chucky and Stephen saw. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
I do. It's about Kratz's book. You were there a second ago. I love it how he impugns so-called internet sleuths as if he's the high and mighty. And he feels free to do exactly the same thing that he's criticizing us for, which is come up with a narrative of his that he believes fits the facts that are available. How is he doing anything different than we're doing on?
Correct. Basically, what Ken Kratz is doing is speculating. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, so, a lot of us on here, I mean, we all have like different opinions, and we might not
Yes.
always agree with each other.
Yes.
And we just, you know what I mean? But we come together. I'm going to say something. I don't know if it'll backfire on me, but I'm just going to put it out there.
Is it
I believe that the
controversial?
lights, well, no, I mean, yeah, kind of, amongst us. But
Does it? But wait, Obi-Wan, does it involve nudity?
no, it doesn't.
Okay, all good, all good.
But I don't know. On the third, I kind of felt like Colburn was present on the property. In fact, William Seberg gives an account where he sees a Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office vehicle in the back by there in Jambo Creek Road driving past his residence.
Technically, his daughter is the one that calls and says her father's seen vehicles driving in the pit, wants to know if they're law enforcement vehicles.
What states in the article that it is a Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office vehicle. But I'm just saying that if Colburn was back there at that property around that time, it could be possible that the lights that he's seen could have been Colburn if Colburn was present at that property that day. We all know that he was the only officer there on the 3rd.
Right.
And
Colburn was off of work, was scheduled to be off of work the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th. He
Right.
takes the 4th off.
Yeah, but whether he takes off is in question. You know, I know,
No,
like
he
on the
did-
books
he
he's
didn't-
off, but
He didn't
you know what I
work
mean?
on the 4th.
Yeah, on the books he's off, but
I mean, he didn't get paid, so he didn't work. He did it on his own free will. He did
His
it.
own
Whatever
free will.
he did on that day, he chose to do himself.
correct.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
But all right, that's
Okay.
all I wanted to say.
Well, he can't remember what he did on that day, but he can remember 8 months after the fact when he's instructed to follow the report that he didn't file about talking to Stephen Avery. He can recall everything that day, but the day after that, no, I don't remember what I did.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, guys. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, Miss Piggy was asking, when did Scott's trailer burn down?
Yeah, good question. Does anyone know the answer to that one?
I know a trailer burned down. I'm not 100% sure if it was Scott's, but I know the Xander Road trailer burned down, the property that Stephen was looking at.
Right.
And also the red trailer on Redance mysteriously disappeared.
Right. Yes.
I know Scott's Cottage trailer was condemned.
Condemned. Right.
And I believe Link is the one that placed the condemned sticker on his trailer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So very well could have possibly been burned, but it was definitely condemned and removed.
Right. Yes. Yeah, the rabbit hole gets deeper, I'm afraid. Okay. Well, guys, let's see if we can finish slide 190. And thank you, panel, and thank you, listeners, for your excellent comments so far. Of course, the victim here is the alleged victim here is Teresa Halbach. Now, here's the issue. There's actually no forensic evidence of Teresa ever being inside Stephen Avery's trailer, nor his garage on October the 31st, 2005. Now, I know some of you guys are going to be jumping up and down saying, oh, yeah, but what about Ida Meffel? Ida Meffel was found months later after Fassbender and Wiegert interrogated Brendan Dassey. So, and we have discussed Ida Meffel in a lot of detail. Ida Meffel should have never been admissible in a court of law for the way Culhane handled Ida Meffel, the fact that the negative control was contaminated, and the mere factor that it contains no bone shards, but wood and red paint. So the key question is, all right, if that's the case, what is Teresa Halbach's DNA doing in the tube labeled item FL? Because it doesn't make any sense. It's very inconsistent. Okay. Millbilly, do you have a comment?
Well, just everything that's been transpired since Zellner took the case. It's very telling. They're screwed.
Correct. Think about it, guys. Look what her investigators found just by looking at the bullet. Imagine if Zellner has access to the RAV4. The most important crime scene, guys, is the RAV4. And the longer it's being left, the evidence is decaying. So hopefully all the swabs have been preserved and well looked after, because really, guys, this case is all about DNA. I would re-extract all the samples all over again. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Michael's asking, has anyone made sense for why Teresa Halbach's body was burned? I assume this is not typical, far too much at risk. Smell smoke, takes a long time, and serious heat, etc. I believe Wisconsin is hiding something here.
Millbilly, do you have a comment?
Well, something happened, obviously. As to exactly what took place, we don't know. We may never know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone on this panel personally believes that Stephen Avery or Brendan Dassey even laid a finger on Teresa Halbach. So why would you want to cremate a body? And it was, let's face it was a cremation. Why would you want to do that? You want to do that to remove all forensic evidence of the perpetrator ever being associated with the victim. And also you cremate a body like that to remove all traces and identity of the victim. Millbilly, do you have a comment?
It just bothers me that when they request her shoes on the 7th, it's like they knew they were going to find something.
Yes. Everything's got this forward planning scenario to it.
And you hear on the morning of the 7th, Wiegert say, we're probably going to be wrapping this up today.
Yes.
What did he mean by that?
Yes. Well, to me, Millbilly, it seems that...
Because on the 6th...
Yes.
You hear them talk in the morning of the 6th, you hear them talking about setting up a roadblock the following day to block off 147, because at that time they just had officers stationed there. They're actually going to go put up barricades. Yes. Well, instead of doing it the next day, they got it done that night.
Yes.
So they purposely completely blocked off 147.
Yes.
So whoever lived around there I don't even know if they're allowed on their property.
Yeah. Yep. It
But then
seems to
again,
me.
you
Yep.
got Radant coming in all the time.
Correct. He could come and go really as he wanted. Bibi, do you have a quick comment?
Yes, everything in this case, it's found like they know they're going to find something. When Colburn goes back in to collect the porn, he's shaking and twisting this cabinet full of change.
Yes.
Why to collect porn do you need to shake and handle roughly the cabinet? You just take the porn out of it.
Yes.
Yes.
Or well, we've discussed the cabinet. We've discussed Colburn. The whole scenario stinks to high heaven. I've never seen a case, and you should see you saw the grin on Colburn when he said, "Oh, well, I didn't treat the cabinet too kindly, and I was very frustrated, and I picked it up and I shaked and I rolled, and oh, Lenk just happens to walk in, and oh my lord, there's a key on the ground."
But the change is perfectly fine on top and still practically in the same exact position.
Correct. And to make matters worse, I think it was years later, Colburn wrote an email to his boss and completely contradicted where the key was. Right? It wasn't in the cabinet at all. It was now strategically at the back of the cabinet. Milby.
Yeah, he completely states it was found hidden. It wasn't on the floor.
Yes. Correct. And Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
Well, two things. I mean, I wanted to get back to that other question with the has anyone made sense for why Teresa's body was burned? The way she was burned was like it was something personal. Either somebody had a vendetta against somebody else and wanted to frame them, or somebody had some type of I guess you could say like intimate bond with this person,
Or
and
somebody has done this before.
they would have destroyed all.
Yes.
Like it was an act of like I would take it over the crime of passion. I mean, it's beyond crime of passion. This is like
Yes.
complete. I mean, they were trying to extinguish and remove all existence of this person. But
Correct.
cops wanted to do this. They would have, in the event they made a mistake or they possibly might have killed this person.
Okay. Why completely incinerate the body but only partially burn the electronics?
Well, they would have wanted to hide the manner of death. That's one of the big things. I don't believe that I don't believe Teresa was shot prior, to death. I just don't see it.
Well, there's evidence that the skull fragment they found that person was shot in the head.
Right, but that could have been.
And if she believes that those bones are hers, that means she was shot in the head.
That could have been post-mortem. That doesn't mean that she died that way.
She was still shot in the head.
Just gave it the appearance that she was shot in the head. You know what I mean? Like if she was already dead and that wouldn't have been really the manner of death, they would have wanted to burn the body so you couldn't prove that she was shot.
Yeah. Yes, I understand what you're saying, Obi-Wan.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Sam.
I just want to say that back in those days, I believe with it being burned so bad to the what would be the remains of a cremation, I believe then they could not test that for DNA to prove who it was back then, possibly.
Yes. Although the remarkable thing, there was a bit of muscle tissue that had remained on the bones where they got a partial profile.
Where is it?
That's it. That's the problem. And and I understand what Obi-Wan is saying. I understand what Milby is saying. That's a perfect thirsty for theory Thursday topic because it's extremely controversial. And you're right. Even Eisenberg the body had to have been shot prior to burning, because she could tell by the condition of the bones and the burn marks around the bullet holes. So the victim was killed. We don't, and Obi-Wan is correct. We don't know the cause of death.
We don't. But the fact that law enforcement went into Brenda's interrogation trying to get him to say that she was shot in the head.
Yes.
The victim they found was shot in the head.
Twice. Minimum twice. And the body was burned after she was shot, after the victim was shot. And Eisenberg could tell by the burn, intensity of the burn and the degree of burning of the cranial bone fragments. So the victim was non-cremated when the victim was shot, right? And I keep on stuttering because we actually don't know who those bones belonged to. Bibi.
And isn't it possible that the person was already dead, then shot in the head, then burned?
You don't know the order, correct? You don't know what happened to the victim. We know that the victim was shot at least twice. Right? There's no dispute, because you've got the beveling marks in the cranial bone fragments. You've got the deposition of lead. There's no doubt that the victim was shot a minimum of 2 times. Obi-Wan.
All right, the grouping of the 2 bullets. Now, I mean, they're so close together, it's unreal. But had she been alive, I don't see that this grouping would have occurred in the manner that it had. Either she was comatose, knocked out, or something, laying on the ground, and they shot her in the head, or she was already dead post-mortem, and then police came upon her body, and I don't know. You know, it's hard to.
We don't know.
Assume. Can't assume. Yeah. You know, I mean, you can assume, but it doesn't make it factual. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know, Obi-Wan. We simply don't know. And remember, Ida Merfell is not linked to the cranial bone fragments, right? They can't link Ida Merfell to the cranial bone fragment. So Ida Merfell did not strike bone. That's a fact.
That means the impact to the head of that victim was not a 22.
No, we don't know.
Well, we got two different murder weapons.
Yeah. Yes, we don't know. We don't know. We do know that Ida Merfell never struck Teresa Halbach or anybody in the skull. There's no bone shards. There's no bone at all. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, Jamie is asking, didn't Manitowoc County pay for Carmen Botwell's cremation? I thought they did.
No, they didn't. That's a rumor.
Who was it? Okay.
They helped make arrangements.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad I asked.
Came right out her brother's mouth.
Yeah, they helped make arrangements or something. It said in the newspaper article.
Right. Millbilly, do you have a comment?
No.
Okay. All right. So, wow. And I wanted to do a short podcast today. Christy was correct. Kate, do you have a comment?
I was just going to say about FL, it also didn't even have blood on it, did it?
No observation of any blood or tissue was observed on Ida Merfell. Correct. And so now the state is left with an embarrassing position. Where did Teresa Halbach's DNA come from? And we know, because I read the documents, and Cherie Cohane had also extracted Teresa Halbach's DNA from an item in the Toyota RAV4. So she had extracted her DNA likely at the same time that she was extracting Ida Merfell. Now, because she contaminated the negative control, she could have easily contaminated Ida Merfell with DNA from Teresa Halbach. So she had Teresa Halbach's DNA at the bench, right? So you can't discount it. That's why her own laboratory manual says if you have a contamination event, you throw everything out and you redo it again. The problem was for the state, Cherie Cohane used all the DNA up and couldn't re-extract the DNA. So because of all the issues with contamination, Ida should have never been admissible in a court of law. And what's embarrassing now is that Zellner's experts showed that there is no bone. So what does Ken Kratz do? Ken Kratz now says, well, there's no blood because the boys used a tarp, obviously a bulletproof tarp. So that explains why there's no blood. And the bullet must have gone through her body. Except he can't offer an explanation why there's no blood or tissue on it. Obi-Wan.
Yeah, can I ask? There was something circling a while back ago about the deviation of form. The deviation form filled out was prior to the negative control test. Is there, any background on that?
Yes, I do. I looked at all the documents. It wasn't just Cherie Cohane. There were other laboratory techs that did things out of sync. So basically, they filled out reports and reported things, not immediately when they took place, but often days after they took place. So actually, there was nothing nefarious about that, except her own supervisor didn't sign it. She went to, I believe it was the Milwaukee laboratory, to get somebody else to sign the deviation request form. So, and also you have to give a reason why you want a deviation request form. So clearly Cohane had to have got the DNA results first, realized that she stuffed up, then had to do a deviation request form. So yeah, it's because they reported the contamination at different times. And I looked at the original books, the original laboratory manuals, and it wasn't only Cherie Cohane that put in contamination at different times. There was another analyst who did exactly the same thing. I did a presentation on that, Obi-Wan. Mill Billy.
I think we should move on to slide 191.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Mill Billy. So that that goes to show the importance of the DNA within this trial. It was all based on DNA. Now, so if we have a look at slide 191, of course, the verdicts have been read out. And here we have a very concerned Ken Kratz, who stated on March the 18th, 2007, he states, I quote, "I'm very happy that the citizens of Manitowoc County won't need to worry about Mr. Avery being on the streets anymore." So here, okay, Christy, take it home.
The citizens of Manitowoc County needed to be more worried about Ken Kratz than they did Stephen Avery any day.
Yes, yes. But Christy, you have to admit, this was the moment of glory that Ken Kratz was seeking. He was the white knight. He got rid of this devious monster called Stephen Avery, and to a same degree, Brendan Dassey, and he makes this statement. But you're right, Christy.
And as a matter of, go ahead.
Yes, keep going.
As a matter of fact, that look, this high that he's on right here in this very picture, is the high he blames for his later drug abuse and sexting scandal. This high that he feels right here in this picture is the reason he decides to start misusing prescription drugs and sexting domestic abuse victims that he was supposed to be helping, not hurting.
Correct. And of course, he used the drugs and his narcissistic personality as an excuse. And he was begging for forgiveness because he had done all this inappropriate sexting because of his narcissism, his addiction to sex, and the fact that he was taking a cocktail of drugs. Christy.
And for all of those reasons, the citizens of Manitowoc County shouldn't need to be worried about Stephen Avery, but Mr. Ken Kratz himself.
It's the prosecutor that they needed to be. That's what I'm saying.
I have to agree with her.
With Judge Willis, I wonder whether the judge was actually looking at Ken Kratz. He was saying the most dangerous person in this courtroom, it's him. And it goes to prove that he went on to commit all these nasty crimes, Ken Kratz himself. All right, so if we proceed to slide 192, look, the reality is, yes, their son got convicted again for the second time, and it has a precipitating domino effect. And Christy and all the other guys on the panel who've listened to the phone calls will back me up. It had a devastating effect. Christy.
I talked about this in one of our Thursday podcasts. This picture breaks my heart. I did listen to all of the first 839 phone calls, as did many others. I listened to them for hours and hours on end, and I feel close to these people. I feel I have a love for them that I can't really explain. It's different, and it's heartbreaking to hear Dolores.
Yes.
When she talks about what law enforcement has done to this family and how they have ripped them apart. And
again, twice.
Yes, again. And then they go after Brendan. So the second shot was like a double shot. It wasn't just Stephen. Yes. Now it was Stephen and Brendan.
Correct. And thank you, Christy. And as you can see here, remember, they run a business and they're reliant on clients coming in all the time. Well, if your son gets convicted for this horrendous murder of a 25-year-old female photographer, that's going to have a devastating effect. And as you can see here, Alan says, I quote, "They ruined us. They ruined our business." And one wonders whether that actually was the intention all along. Because remember, there were suggestion that Randolph wanted to get the land because the salvage yard is odd. It's all surrounded by quarries. Christy.
It's definitely a possibility. We hear in the phone calls, not long after Stephen was arrested, Alan's sister Yvonne's daughter, Heather, so Stephen's cousin Heather, was killed in a car accident. And they were requesting Avery Salvage Yard to be the tow truck to come get the car that Heather was killed in. And law enforcement flat out refused to call Avery's and have the car towed by Avery's, even though it was the request of the people at the scene of the crime, at the scene of the accident.
Yes. And who is the gentleman that has a salvage yard that's part of law enforcement? Millbilly. Who's got the salvage yard?
The Hermans.
And that's a competing salvage yard, of course, right?
Cleveland.
Yeah, there you go. So you've got another competing salvage yard in the same, I'm not sure whether in the same area or close by. Millbilly, do you know where Herman's salvage yard is?
It's south of Avery's.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So as
closer
you can
to Ricky Hostetler's mom's house.
Right.
It is to the Avery's.
Right. Okay. So as you can see, it really had a huge effect on their business. And in MAM 1, I think also in MAM 2, they keep on showing aerial shots of the salvage yard. And you can see the number of cars there is just going down and down and down. Millbilly.
It's south of the city of Manitowoc.
Right. Okay. The Herman Salvage Yard?
Yeah, it's in Cleveland, Wisconsin.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so it did have a huge effect on their business. People weren't going there anymore, and it was a huge downturn. And I think they also had to sell a lot of their cars as scrap, which you only get a certain amount of money for rather than parts. So it
Well,
had a
it all
huge effect.
depends. It all depends on which, because the scrap prices change daily.
Yes,
So you got to hope that you're monitoring it, and when it's high, you go and sell them.
correct. Yes, because when they take apart the cars, they take away the copper, the
Yeah.
stainless steel,
Yep.
the aluminium. Correct.
There were processes and everything there. That's why they had a bunch of people working for them too.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Millbilly. And to really echo what Christy was saying, every time I see Dolores here, it breaks my heart too. And she's a mum, and she said this one's worse than the first one, and there is no family anymore. And you just have to listen to the phone calls, especially some of the later ones. The whole family is in crisis. And yes, Big Jeff, there was a Thirsty for Theory Thursday done on those calls. You can hear the desperation. Millbilly.
Well, when they go after Marie, that turns Earl and Candy against Steven.
Yes.
And then they go after Brendan, and now Barb is against him.
Yes.
And the whole
Yeah.
time, Chuck is on the fence. I don't know which way to go.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. It's not good. It's not good. The whole family is in crisis. Christy, do you want to make a comment about that?
No, sorry, I was having trouble getting back in. Discord's
No.
not liking us today.
All right. Big Jeff, do you want to make a comment on the family crisis?
It's quite evident that law enforcement was driving them to crisis by what they were doing. Brendan had just been recently put in there that set Steven against Barb.
Yes.
And Earl Avery was already
Yes.
at his throat, and the poor Dolores doesn't know what to do. I mean, and after the trial's
Yeah.
over, she's right. She doesn't have a family left. Nobody was
Yeah.
talking to each other.
No.
I don't think Earl Avery went down to visit Stephen during his incarceration, but maybe once. I think there's a picture of him, maybe twice. I don't know that Chuck has ever been. So she's right.
Yeah.
The family was torn apart.
Yeah, it was torn apart. Yeah, and you can hear that on the phone calls. And like I said, on the Foul Play server, the YouTube channel, we've got 1,174 at the moment, and there'll be more. So you can hear the breakup, you can hear the tension, and the fact that Stephen Avery was even wanting to sue the salvage yard as well. That's how bad it actually got. All right. So yes, unfortunately, it wasn't just Brendan and Stephen that were affected. A lot of the family members were, and it really tore apart the family. All right, guys, let's have a look at slide 193. We can have a look at this pretty quickly. This involves Stephen's post-conviction motion hearing that was done on September the 28th. And again, what is remarkable is that Ken Kratz comes in, he's smiling, he's beaming, and even the Hallpark family smiling and beaming. Sammy, do you have a comment?
No, sorry, that was
All good?
accident.
No problems, no problems at all. And he can't, and I just can't get out of my mind. But Ken Kratz looks like a game show host. He's got a beaming smile. He's probably high as a kite. And look, compare that and look at the contrast of Stephen. Right, he looks terrible. Right, disheveled, hair unkept. He's put on a lot of weight, and things are not looking good. Things are not looking good. So, guys, panel, do you want any comments at all about the post-conviction motion hearings? Christy.
I don't really have a comment about the hearing. I just have a comment about the look on Mark Wiegert's face.
Oh yeah.
It
Yep.
says a lot. Body language says a lot. And Mark Wiegert looks like he's waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, what are they gonna uncover that's gonna catch us?
Yeah. Correct.
He looks worried
And
in that picture. He doesn't look
he
like a
does.
confident investigator who feels like
No.
he has a secure conviction coming.
No.
He looks
And
scared.
correct. And again, they weren't really sure the way the judge was going to go, but we can hear the comments from the family and also from Stephen himself. Oh, it's the same judge. He doesn't like me. It's not going to be good, and it didn't turn out good. So if we have a look at slide 194, you can see the big contrast between the states team, right? Here they're in big, deep conversation. And you compare that with Brendan, with his appellate attorney. And he had no money left, right? He had no money left. So he had to go with a public defender. And you can see here the trials, the timing, that the briefs were going to be held on October the 30th. The replies were going to be done on November the 13th. And then finally, the decision on December the 1st. And unfortunately, things did not turn out too well for Stephen at all. And you can see the family just constantly surrounded by the media that were never, ever left alone. Guys, do we have any comments? Christy.
The media absolutely harassed this family, both at the courthouse and at their own homes. There was a night that Dolores was on the phone with Stephen talking about
Yes.
how one reporter came right up to her door. I'm assuming she has a deck and maybe a sliding glass door or
She
something,
does.
right
Yes,
up
I
to her
do.
door. And she
Yes.
was really freaked out. What if she was in her nightgown or her night clothes and the woman wouldn't go? She didn't want to change early enough anymore because these people were now coming all the way up to her door.
Yeah, and Lord help Dolores if she just came out of the shower in a bathrobe. It would have made front page news, right? Oh my Lord.
Can you imagine? Those people were
Yeah,
brutal to that family. They should
they
be
were
ashamed
brutal.
of them. Most of those reporters, there was a few who I feel were in it for the truth and not the ratings. And most
Yeah.
of the media that came in contact with them were absolutely horrible and should be ashamed of the way they treated that family.
Yes, correct. They were like a pack of wolves, unfortunately. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
I do. The trial, Ken Kratz really started the trial in the media, and he ended it in the media as well. It was just the media ended it for him with that disgraceful performance that Christy was just talking about. But that was really what he used to turn the tide of public opinion. Was his prosecutorial misconduct press conference on March the
March the 2nd. Correct.
And that was really in a lot of ways sort of what turned the tide of public opinion, because as we know from the phone calls, even people who Stephen had been close with, for example Rollie Johnson, were treating him a lot differently after the conviction.
Yes. Yep. Correct. Thank you, Big Jeff.
And the media treated him and his family after that accordingly.
Yes, correct. It was a master move by Ken Kratz, and I believe, and Christy again will back me up. The way Ken Kratz works is very, very simple. He begs for forgiveness rather than ask for permission. So he'll do the deed first, and then try and backtrack and say, "Oh, I'm sorry," because in his book. Christy, what does Ken Kratz say about the press conference?
He says a lot of things, but he says that the press conference is his only regret.
And his only regret.
His only regret. The only regret he has in the case of Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. But I want to back up for 1 second.
Sure.
I just lost my train of thought. I hate when that. Oh, you said he begs for forgiveness. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. He doesn't ask
Okay.
for permission and he doesn't beg for forgiveness. He just basically says, "Hey, I messed up. Deal with it.
Yes.
I am.
Y-
Why can't you get over it?"
You mean
There's
I was
no there's no apology, there's no remorse, there's no asking for forgiveness.
yes, and you could tell by his attitude, his tenacious attitude against the families, and he's sort of got a little bit of remorse with Brendan, but he's still pretty happy with the outcome, right? He's pretty happy with the outcome. Well, look, guys,
He is. Mhm.
believe it or not, Christy, we're going to finish the podcast here because I feel that the podcast from now on really changes direction. And there's a big focus on Brendan Dassey. We can actually finish on slide 195. We can do the next one, but we'll make that our last one for today. I know the podcast is slightly shorter, but if we have a look at slide 195, it's really the introduction of Stephen Avery's new so-called girlfriend, Sandy Greenman, and she wrote a lot of letters to Stephen while he was in jail, and she believed in Stephen's innocence. And I believe many years before they met, and they became mutual friends. And then Stephen later on says that he wanted to marry Sandy, but Sandy became a friend of the family and wrote a lot of correspondence with Stephen, and the two became close and mutual friends. But I think slide 195 is a good natural break because we now turn to Brendan Dassey and what happened to him. And I think that probably deserves its own podcast. So, guys, do we have any final comments? I know it's a shock. We finished slightly early, but do we have any comments on the podcast so far? Bibi, do you have any final comments?
Just on Sandra Greenman, she's been a very loyal friend to Steve for very many years.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. She did a lot for Stephen, and apparently they both supported each other. Her husband had Alzheimer's disease, I think, and passed away, and the two wrote a lot of correspondence to each other, and they helped each other out at at critical times in both of their lives. And you're right, Sandy was a good friend of Stephen Avery. Thank you, Bibi. Big Jeff, do you have any final comments?
Well, this is certainly the anticlimax of Stephen Avery's story for now.
Yes.
And it won't be long before Kathleen Zellner comes on board, which is really his biggest hope. And certainly we can't also forget to say something about the Making a Murderer film crew, Laura Riccardi and Moira Demos, because without them, Stephen wouldn't have Kathleen Zellner, and he wouldn't have all the help either. The state can try and hide what it wants, but the Zelnami is coming.
Yes, it is. It is. Thank you very much, Big Jeff. And it's very interesting, if I could just add, one of the reasons that Ken Kratz gives for writing his book is because he felt that the film crew were really part of the Stephen Avery's defense team, and weren't giving enough exposure to the state's point of view. Yet the film crew and the directors kept on asking Ken and everybody else, you want to make comments, you want to be interviewed. They didn't want to be part of it. So, to say that the directors were part of the Stephen Avery's defense team, I think it's pretty childish, pretty nefarious. Kate, do you have any final comments about today's podcast?
No, I was just going to say about that, them being part of a defense team is just ludicrous when they had Brendan's defense were actually working for state. You know, it's just stupid.
Correct.
Right.
And correct. But thankfully, from the Mem 1, we can see that. We saw how it panned out. And so, as Big Jeff alluded to, thank the Lord that those directors filmed this as it was happening. Because honestly, when the first time I saw Man 1, I could not believe what I was seeing. It was ridiculous. Christy, do you have any final comments about the podcast?
Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you for listening. And I mean, everything that's happened so far is a travesty, and it's hard to put into words. It's very hard to put into words. But I thank you for going through Making a Murder episode by episode and putting together these podcasts for people. I think they've been great and very informative and helpful.
Yes, thank you, Christy. I mean, we never stop learning. I'm learning new stuff all the time. And again, I thank Crockett for pointing out when we make a mistake, we can go back over it. We can make sure that we're telling the right things, that we have our facts straight. And if we make an error, we'll try our very best to correct it. So yeah, thank you very much, guys. I appreciate that a lot. Millbilly, do you have any comments?
I'd just like to thank everybody for all their support.
Fantastic. And don't forget Millbilly's excellent YouTube channel. And Millbilly covers a lot of aspects of the case, especially the phone calls regarding law enforcement. And Millbilly's done many other excellent presentations and many interviews with Paul Cabaldi and with others. Please go check out Millbilly's channel. It's excellent. Obi-Wan, do you have any final comment?
No, I don't. I just want to say good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, guys. Well, I'd like to thank all our listeners and thank you very much for all your support. Please leave your comments. And if you like what we do, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Thank you very much, guys.
This has been a Foul Play production.